Bit of a disclaimer before the video starts. First of all, it's 2 hours long, so get your popcorn, get your sody pops. It's a long and bumpy ride, lots of explaining things, and a lot of slow work process in the middle. And in tandem with that, this was a stream, so a lot of going all over the place in many different areas at once. Certain things might pop into my mind, and then I'll cover them. It might be better to watch something like this in the background if you don't feel like you have enough time. Just sort of listen to it. But yeah, enjoy. All right. So, like I said about a minute ago, this is specifically to showcase how my animation process goes specifically for making animations for A Hat in Time. Not a lot of people are making animations in the community. I'm not sure if this is going to spur any growth in that area. I personally think it's really fun. It takes a lot of time and a lot of effort, and usually you don't really see results until about 70 to 90% of the way through the animation process. But the biggest changes are probably going to come once you reach the end of an animation, once you have mostly everything in place and you start like minorly editing things around. Okay, first things first, I'm in Blender. I have my nice little Hat Kid model right here. She's got her nice little root bone here, so I'm gonna kind of structure this how I would a ground up tutorial. Like, you might not even know like how to get Hat Kid out of the editor. I'm not gonna cover like that specifically, because that's a lot of things for me to cover, but I'm going to try to cover as much as I can in Blender. So, starting out here, when you import Hat Kid into the editor, you're obviously going to have your model and your skeleton. I personally don't really texture her. I'm sure a lot of other people do. I just don't really care as far as animations go, because first of all, when you're in the material editor mode up here at the top right, animations will move considerably slower. So if you're in the solid viewport shading, they'll run just about as fast as your computer will let them go. And again, another thing, once you import the model into Blender, you will be missing this nice little root bone here. You might have the armature right here named root. You might have this little armature doodle bop up here named root as well. As far as animation goes, first of all, we do need a root bone. You'll either need to put that bone in yourself and weight the model to that bone where the weights are missing, or you can download the file. I might include it as a link in the VOD, or you can find me on the Discord channel, and I will be happy to distribute that file. As far as these two parts being named root, these two right here that I'm clicking on, they should not be named root, or else there can be some problems with importing the animation after you're finished making it. The editor will be like, what the heck? Why, there's so many roots. That means that this skeleton does not match Hat Kid's, and therefore I'm not doing this. And so you're like, okay, well, shoot, that's not good. So for this purpose, it doesn't really matter what they're named as long as they're not named root. So I named one of them Skelemesh and one of them Skeleton-Mesh. You can name it Jeff and George for all the editor cares, because as long as it's not named the same thing as the root bone. Alright, so getting into the actual animation process, I have decided to animate the Super Mario 64 Starget animation as an example. I got that as a recommendation from the Discord channel. Thank you so much for that recommendation, by the way, because I was really hurting for one. And I think this is actually a pretty good one. So first, let's go through the video real quick first. So very short animation indeed, but it has a lot of movement to it and a lot of, I wouldn't call it complex, but I think I should be able to cover a lot of the bases with this animation in particular, such as like interpolation, translation, and many other things that we will come to that aren't coming to mind currently. And I will get to everything as thoroughly as I possibly can within these 1 to 2 hours that I'm hoping to stream. So, first things first, when you if you're starting from scratch with Blender, you are going to most likely be starting with an idle animation applied to her. And also, I usually use this animation tab right here in Blender. I'm a fan of it. Let's be honest here. And in the top right, top left, usually I change the editor type to a graph editor. This is for later down the road, but I don't need to see the model twice. So I would like to have some more information instead of just having one viewport being basically useless. And down at the bottom, I usually change the dope sheet to an action editor. And as you can see right now, I have no actions whatsoever, yet I do have Hat Kid in her idle pose. She does have an actual animation for the idle, but I don't have the actual animation in this file currently. So right now, she has no animation data whatsoever. She does have a single pose data, which is that beginning frame of that idle animation. And if you'll notice right here, if I go ahead and just clear the transformation on all of them right here, she'll be put into a T-pose. We don't want that because most of the time when you're beginning animation, I would personally recommend making the idle pose one of the first frames, or basically the first frame of your animation, just because usually these animations will occur off of her idle animation, so it'll just transition seamlessly into what you're working on. So that brings us to, well, first of all, you have right here action. This is the name of the animation that you're working on. So for this purpose, I'm just going to name it Starget. Doesn't really matter. You can leave it on action for all it matters, but it's just, I don't know, it's a contingency, I suppose you could say. And with all the bones we have selected, we want to move our cursor back to 1, which is where our starting frame is. We could have it on 0. It all depends on what we have right here in the bottom right where it says start and end. This is just dictating how long the animation is. So if I want it to go from 1 to 100, all I have to do is just edit this end to 100, and boom, you can see that the, I guess you could call it the playing space, kind of shrinks here. This light grayish is where the animation takes place, and when you hit play right here, it will scroll through the animation at the designated frame rate that you give it, and then once it hits that last frame, it's going to restart back at the beginning frame, and it'll keep going until you tell it to stop. For me specifically, most of the time I animate in 30 frames per second. You can change that value by going right here to the output properties. Currently I have it set to 24, but for my future animations I'm probably going to be going into 60 frames per second, just because it's not going to hurt me that much to go to 60. It's just going to improve the quality of the animations mostly. The more frames that you have, sorry, one moment. Soren has a question. What happened to the crash animation? You finished that / finish that later. Okay. In the last stream that I did, the one that the VOD was lost in, I was working on the Crash victory dance from Crash 2 and 3. I still have the files for that. I haven't worked on it anymore since then. It would probably take a couple more hours to finish, and I'm not sure if I will. I still have to think on that. I haven't done much work since that stream. I've been kind of just relaxing, doing other things, but I do still have those files. I might finish them later. Not sure yet. But back to what I was talking about. I'm trying to go 60 frames per second from now on because well, obviously, like, a higher frame rate is going to provide like smoother transitions between keyframes, and well, obviously you're going to have more keyframes because the speed is now higher. So if you had 120 frames of animation and you're running at 30 frames per second with your animation, it would take 4 seconds for the animation to complete. However, if you change the animation frame rate to 60, it would only take 2 seconds to complete, logically speaking. So it's usually good to set your frame rate before you begin animating. You can always change the position of keyframes later. However, you should probably set your frame rate first and then begin animation. So Blender's default is 24 for whatever reason. I'm sure you could probably change the default in your preferences. I'm too lazy to do so right now. So if you want to figure out how to do that, Google it, I guess. So now that I have it set to 60 frames, I'm going to attempt to figure out how long I specifically want this animation. Usually it's good to figure out the length of the animation as well as the frame rate in the beginning, just so that you don't have to like change the positions of keyframes later, and you can say, okay, I want this keyframe to be there, this keyframe to be there, and then just kind of move smoothly through that process without having to be like, ooh, maybe you should move that one. So let's see here. We're going to start the moment he begins that animation, which would be right about here on this frame. And it seems like the video is about 2 seconds long, so... Here we go! Here we go! I'd say that's about 1.6 to 1.7 seconds of animation. So let's get a little Excel sheet up real quick, because it's good to have this stuff documented as well. You don't really have to go this far as to get an Excel sheet. I would usually do this in Paint, but for the sake of the Twitch stream, I'd like to have everything a little bit cleaner than it usually is. Yeah, I'm usually pretty messy when it comes to like writing down the numbers that I'm about to describe. So we are running at 60 frames per second, so let's type that in. Sorry, let's be a little bit more specific. 60 FPS, fantastic. And make that bigger so that it's easier to see. And we are trying to go for probably 1.6 probably seconds of animation. Let's make that bigger as well. Too big. There we go. So that will probably then run for 60 and then 0.6. That would be 36 extra frames. So 96 frames. 96 frames total. And now that we have our actual, like, this is what we hopefully want it to be, is about 96 frames long. Again, we can edit that later, but it's nice to figure out. I'm getting DMs, goodness me. Trying to, where was I? Yeah, it's good to figure out the length of your animation just so that you can sort of gauge it, and you can edit the length later, as I've been saying probably ad nauseum as of this point. So I'm going to set it to 96, and that is what I said. Yep. Okay, cool. So we have 1 to 96. That is 96 frames. And yep, so now we should probably start. And okay, so what you could do if you're taking a reference to make an animation, what you could do is separate the video out into its separate frames. But for the sake of this video, I'm going to be a little bit lazy here, so forgive me for doing that, but I'm going to sort of guesstimate the length of what I want each keyframe to be. I'll go a little bit more in depth on the splitting them into separate frames. So if you are familiar with the Club Penguin dance mod on the workshop, that one was specifically made, it was replicated frame by frame, which isn't that impressive because it's like a browser game from, what, 2004? But I digress. The fact of the matter is, I got a GIF of the dance from Google and then separated it into all of its separate frames, figured out how long each frame would be up, and then was like, okay, this one's going to be up for 3 frames if it's running at 30 frames a second. This one's going to be going for only a single frame. This one's going to only be going for a single frame. It all depends on how fast each frame was going by and whether or not they were duplicates or not, which can be a little hard to tell with animation sometimes because of how smooth transitions can be. It wasn't really that hard to tell for Club Penguin Dance, but for other animations it probably will be. But beyond that, I will be guesstimating for the Starget animation. So we are going to start the moment his feet land, which is about right there. So we're going to count how many major keyframes we're probably going to put in. And hey, welcome, Boo. We're just about to get started. I went through some basic info, but now we're actually gonna get into the nitty-gritty. So yeah, so I'm going to first go through what I would call major keyframes. So basically the process begins with putting in just the major positions, like the apexes in movement that the character reaches, because I mean obviously that's what you are going to want with your animation. You'll add in things like minor keyframes later. That would be after you get all the major keyframes down, because once you get all the major keyframes down, the character's probably going to go from pose to pose not how you want it to, and that's perfectly fine, because usually putting in major keyframes doesn't even account for half of the work that you'll do making an animation. So once you're done putting in major keyframes, then you'll start putting in like in-betweens where like, okay, now I want it to go out this way before it goes into that next major keyframe, so it looks more like a curvature motion or something like that, because most of the time it'll just try to go straight there, sometimes with varying speeds, because usually the interpolation is set to Bezier, which we will cover later. But for now, we will start with our major keyframes. So we will have, first of all, our little idle pose, which is where Mario is right now, which we will put in right now because we already have our little idle pose, so we might as well. So in order to insert a keyframe, usually what I would do is have all of the bones selected in pose mode. May I point that out, that we are in pose mode, and that's the only way that you can do animation. So once you have all the bones selected, which you can do by hitting the A key, you can hit the I key, which brings up the insert keyframe menu. Usually I only reserve my animations to whole character and whole character selected bones only. For the major keyframe specifically, we just want to do whole character, usually because we're trying to get the entire character moving between all these frames no matter what. And it's just an overall smoother experience if you make sure that all the bones are keyframed, because if a bone isn't keyframed, it's going to offer trouble down the road that I don't think I need to get into. So now that we have that first keyframe down, you'll see that like we have the summary line right here with a dot, and then we have all the bones listed right here, going all the way down to all the bones that she has. And we'll discuss later that you can like select keyframes, deselect them, move them around, scale them, and whatnot. But for now, let's move back to figuring out how many major keyframes we have. So we just put in that idle keyframe that Mario is sitting at, and we want him to... So there we go. There's one apex in movement. You'll see that he kind of scrunches up into that position before he turns right back around and goes through the rest of the movement. So we're going to say that, boom, we're in his idle pose, and then we have this first major keyframe right here where he's preparing to spin around. So we'll consider that one. And then we're going to say that that probably would be another decent major keyframe to have, since he will be spinning directly afterwards. So, yep, we're gonna count that position as 2. Then he's going to spin around on his right foot, and he's going to keep that movement until he hits that kneeling pose down there. I'd say that right there is probably the end of that specific movement, so I will call that 3. And then he'll reel back and bring up that peace sign for a 4th major keyframe. I'm really glad that we're doing this animation rather than the Crash Bandicoot dance, because I feel like this one offers more diverse options as far as animation goes, and we have less keyframes to cover, so it shouldn't be that hard to cover in a relatively short time. So we're going to have 4 major keyframes after the idle pose, so I guess you could say that's a total of 5. So there's one, there's 1, there's 2, there's 3, 3, and there's 4. And again, it doesn't really matter if you miss a major keyframe, because again, you'll be editing this so many times over that you'll eventually be putting a frame in that you missed anyways. So it's not that big of a deal. The animation process is pretty lenient as far as screwing up things goes, because even if you do screw something up, you can either undo it or you can just like fix it around some other area as well later. So we're gonna say that again the animation's 1.6 seconds long. Now we need to kind of try to eyeball how long each of our major keyframes will last. So this initial going from idle to that ready to turn pose, that's gonna probably be about that can probably be about half a second, and that's probably overestimating. So I'm gonna say that's probably gonna be 30 frames. So I guess we can begin on that one then. So let's go 30 frames up, and you'll notice that I still have my ending frame on 96. Did I seriously say that was gonna be a half a second long? Why did I say that? That's dumb. No, it does not. It should not be half a second long if the entire animation itself is 1.6 seconds. So we're gonna say it's probably gonna be about probably about 0.3, maybe 0.35 seconds. Something like that. Welcome to the stream, you fellas. We're actually about to get into the nitty-gritty, even though we're almost half an hour in. So we're gonna say that that's probably about 0.3 to 0.35 seconds long, that first kind of dip to get ready for the spinning. So we're going to see if we can't get a even amount of frames, because you cannot have decimal frames, which should not be a surprise. So 3.5 times 60. Wait, 0.35 times 60. My brain's not really running that fast because I accidentally took a nap today, but it is all good. So that should be about 21 frames long. So we're gonna go to frame 21, and so before you start making the pose for a keyframe, you should have your little blue marker here in your action editor where you want the frame to be. If you don't, again, not a huge deal. The animation process is really lenient. So for example, if I decided that my pose for a certain keyframe was going to look like that. We're just going to be a little lazy here because why not? So we're going to say that, okay, this is what I want this is what my keyframe is. And oh shoot, I wanted that keyframe to be at frame 30 instead. Oh, let's just move that little dial over. Oh no, it's gone. Because it's going to, if you click off anywhere, it's going to automatically move to whatever is in the animation already, not like anything that's already currently saved in the animation. Because currently any animation data that you're creating, like if you're moving around a bone, that's not saved until you keyframe it. So if you have a bone out like that and you're like, I want that to be my keyframe, and then you accidentally move that and you're like, oh shoot, I just lost my entire pose, everything's ruined, why does this always happen to me? You can just simply Control Z it and your cursor will be back there. And if you still say, well, I would really want that keyframe to be at like frame 40 or frame 50, select all the bones so that you can Control C it, which is just copying the pose to the buffer right here as it says in the bottom of the screen, and then you can move it right over to frame 50. Again, the pose has been lost, but just Control V and it pastes the pose back. Very simple. So let us begin. We want our thing to be on frame 21, and that's where we will begin. So first things first, you will want to mostly be making your animations with rotation. Sometimes you'll want to move the bones around, most of the time not. Most of the time you'll be moving bones. For example, like the root bone, just so that you can change Hat Kid's distance from the ground just in case her knees bend, or if like some kind of bobbing animation would be better suited, because another thing as far as hat and time animations go, it would fit the style better if the animation was more exaggerated. So even if you had a pose that looks somewhat like realistic to how a real person would do that sort of animation that you're making for her, it might be better if you exaggerate it just a little bit, so for the sake of the cartoony aspect of the entire game as a whole. I made that mistake of being a little bit not cartoony and bombastic with a couple of my other animations that I made in the past. A bit of a whoopsie there, but I'd encourage that you should go more exaggerated than less exaggerated, because I feel like it just fits the game better. And as far as selection goes, if you can't see a bone, which is constant problem because her bones are buried in her body, shockingly enough, you can toggle the X-ray with this button right here, and you will see all of the bones. And I don't usually leave this on all the time, specifically because this gets a little hard to deal with sometimes, because now her bones are getting in the way of her other bones, and it's kind of hard to see what I'm working with when her bones are coming through her body, when sometimes I really just need to see what does Hat Kid's body look like right now, because usually you just kind of like eyeball it, of like, okay, yeah, that's a nice pose, I think I'll move on then. So yeah, toggle X-ray with that button. And so we will probably start with this animation by bending her legs, specifically so that I know how far down I need to move her root bone. Another thing I need to cover now is that when you are rotating these bones, it will be default set to transform orientations through the global axis. I severely do not recommend this unless you are working with like either the root bone or the spine bones, and that's only if Hat Kid's facing directly forward, specifically because her bones are a little tilted. So if you do rotate those on the normal axis, like I heavily recommend rotating mostly every single bone on the normal axis. Sometimes rotating on the normal axis with your spine can yield unintended results, and even then we'll get to more specifics on how to rotate her spine bones, as well as her, actually we can cover that now, skirt bones and spine bones. As you can see, the structure for this stream is incredible. So usually for rotating things such as the bip skirt front 01 and the bip skirt back 01, as well as the spine 01 and bip spine 02, you'll notice that if I'm like, okay, because most of the time when you're rotating the skirt, you're doing that solely because your legs are going forward or backwards, and the bottom of the dress should be doing likewise. So if I'm rotating this as it currently stands, this does not look good. Do not do this. I will cry. If I see this animation on the workshop of her skirt doing this, I will weep 1,000 tears, and you will feel very bad, and so will I. So what I would recommend doing is, with the root bone selected, hit Shift S and put your cursor to selected. Soren, don't you dare try to make that animation. I will be very sad. I'm already sad by a lot of animations that I see sometimes. So with your root bone, now that you have your 3D cursor on the root bone, after doing your Shift S, what you can do is change the transform pivot point right here to the 3D cursor. So you'll notice that even though I only have this bip skirt front 01 selected right here in the upper left, my axes are directly on that point that I specified. And I think it's mostly best, for the most part, it's always best to rotate off of the root bone, specifically because like that's the center of her body. So now if you want to be like, okay, her legs are moving forward, I want to have her skirt forward so they're not clipping. So then just rotate it upwards. And that looks much better. But you'll also notice that the bone started moving instead of just simply rotating. So that we will cover again later, but when you rotate off of a different axis of a single bone, if you're not rotating off of its own axis, then it will be receiving some translation data, which is not a big deal, because once we put it into the editor, translation data is by default disabled once you import an animation into the editor, but we can simply re-enable that, and I will try to show that here before we're done. So I'm going to try to show the entire process. But, so, you can rotate that skirt, so it looks nice. You can also rotate the spine bone very nicely, because, again, if I change it to the median point where it's rotating around its own axis, if I bend it, yeah, you'll see if she bends backwards, then her back kind of starts to fold in on itself, and if I try to rotate her forwards, her stomach starts to kind of fold in on itself, and that would not look nearly as good unless we rotate it off of the 3D cursor, which actually looks like she is bending down. And again, it's not perfect all the time, so you'll see that there's like a little fold there, but you can just fix that by maybe moving it around just a little bit. I think it looks fine as it is. And if something doesn't look right, it's an animation, so if something doesn't look right, it usually won't be as detectable as you think it's going to be because it's moving specifically. So a lot of things that you might think, oh, this is going to look really heckin' awkward, well, it's running at 60 frames per second, so you tell me. And finally, the bip spine 2. You can also rotate that around the root, but what you also can do is try to rotate around spine 1 instead, because that would just be like the natural order of things that, like, obviously, I would hope everyone watching has a spine. Your top spine bone does not rotate based off of your hip bone. Your top spine bone rotates off of the bone directly below it. So we're going to set our cursor over to spine 1 if we want to rotate spine 2, and then we're going to go ahead and try to rotate that. And that looks semi-natural. Much more natural if I tried it from the median point, which causes her entire body to go all out of whack. If you don't have a spine, I don't know what to tell you, mate. I feel like you might have bigger problems than not knowing animation. And not knowing animation is not a huge deal. Now that we have that out of the way, we can move to actually setting our keyframes. So, looking at the pose that we have now, we don't have a very good angle, but we can pretty much guess what pose he's in based on the fact that I hope you also have bodies, so you would also know, like, oh, if I was in that sort of position, then I would probably do this. Sometimes you'll want to think to yourself, okay, I honestly don't know what kind of pose that would be, what kind of movement that would be. You can just get out of your chair and just, like, do it in your own room. It's not that hard. I did that for... I might have done that for the default dance. I definitely did not do that for the Club Penguin dance because I had the... you're stuck in a jar, very funny. I definitely did that for a couple of the animations with LC's Hat Kid Steals the Declaration of Independence 2 mod. I definitely actually got up out of my own chair and, like, kind of walked through the animations myself before doing them. So you can always walk through them yourself physically. I think that does help to visualize it in your mind if you actually physicalize it on yourself. So looking at this pose here, we're going to say that Mario's feet are, like, at about a 90-degree angle with themselves. You can see that nice little right angle he's got there with his feet. So I'm going to say, very helpful to have a mirror in your room when you do that, by the way. I suppose having a mirror would help a decent bit, depending. I didn't personally use a mirror just because, like, whenever I'm moving my body, I'm usually kind of pretty much aware what's going on. So I usually don't need a mirror, but if y'all think you need a mirror, then absolutely go for it. Be my guest. I am not the be-all and end-all of animation expertise. So based on this idle pose that we have right here, I'd say her feet are around... that's pretty close to 90. I'm gonna say probably about 80 degrees apart. And we want them to be a definite 90. So I'm gonna exaggerate this just a little bit from the video. And if you want to rotate the feet, just rotate the legs outward. This is another one of the things that I would not recommend doing normal, because you'll see that, like, when I have the axis facing forward, all of the axes are just kind of angled, and that's what's natural with her normal position. So if we decide to rotate it off of its normals, and if we want to rotate it outwards like that, you'll see that it kind of also tilts her leg upwards, so her leg's a little bit skewed here, which it would be much easier if we could just say, okay, rotate over there. See, boom. No skewed angles, just straight up rotation on that Z, on that global Z axis. And you'll see that if you open this little window up in the bottom left of this viewport, after you finish an action, you'll see that you can edit the properties of what action you just took. So I just rotated it by negative 8.84 degrees. And I'm not really a fan of that much. I'm going to exaggerate a little bit further than 90, maybe, depending on how it looks. But for now, I think I want to rotate it by negative 7.5 degrees instead. Go ahead and voice y'all's opinions. I mean, do what you will, please, because you might even bring up a very good point. Like, I didn't even think about using a mirror, but a mirror could be very helpful. I just don't do it. And again, I'm not the be-all, end-all, so it doesn't matter. So we'll rotate that by 7.5 degrees as well. And if you don't want to use the sliders, then that's fine too. If you want to rotate on an axis, all you have to do is just hit R. You're in rotate mode. And if you want to lock it to a certain axis, you'll just be like, okay, I want to rotate by R, and then hit the Z button. You're rotating on the Z axis. Rotate X, hit X, rotate on Y, hit Y. If you want to rotate via two axes at the same time and disclude one, then you'll just hit Shift and then whatever axis you're not editing. So if you're trying to rotate it off of X and Y at the same time, then hit Shift Z, and then you'll see that now the Y and X axes have both shown up. I'm not going to be doing that, of course. I do a lot of typing usually when I do these rotations because I like to know exactly how much I've rotated them by, just in case I need to either undo it later in another keyframe, or if I need to mirror it across, like, to another body part. Then I'll know, okay, I want it to be 30 degrees rotated, so that I can, like, get it across a little bit easier, a little bit faster, a little bit more efficiently. So now that I have these legs rotated, I'm going to say I want them rotated just a bit further, maybe another 5 degrees. So I'm going to rotate this foot by Z5, and since we're mirrored, usually you can't just do the exact same, usually you have to negative it, so RZ negative 5, since you're rotating them both outwards and not in the same direction. I'd say I'm probably pretty satisfied with that, with how far the legs are spread apart. And now it looks like Mario is in a very, very low state to the ground. So what we're going to try to do is we're going to try to bend her legs as much as possible whilst also keeping her legs sort of under her. They're going to be a little bit in front of her, but that's all right. So I'm going to try to get her just as close to the ground as possible. So I'm going to rotate that on its normal axes. When her legs are rotated like this, it's not good to be doing this global. So I'm going to rotate her negative 60 on the y-axis, and I'm going to probably rotate this part of the leg to... Oh, she's going to look Slavic. Okay, let's do 95 degrees. There. So now we just want to replicate that by rotating this one up about negative 65 degrees. I did say 65, I'm pretty sure. Yay, I'm already forgetting. Maybe this wasn't the best day to stream this. Yeah, that looks right. And then we can rotate the feet as well. Usually you should probably try to rotate the feet last to make sure that, like, the last of the legs specifically, because if you're thinking to yourself, okay, that's probably about how high I want the legs, or how much I want the legs to be bent, then that's at the point where you could be like, okay, time to try to get the feet flat, which can sometimes be a bit of a problem. But what we're going to do is going to rotate it just a wee bit. That looks pretty flat. Right about there. And again, you'll notice that the legs are a little bit cocked, which is fine. We can rotate it just a wee bit on the other axes to kind of flatten it out. And then we do the same with this foot. And this is another one of those things that we're just kind of eyeballing. We're not using exact numbers with mirroring and whatnot. Just trying to get what we can rolling here without, like, needing to use much brain power. Because this is a very hands-on experience. You don't really need, like, a bunch of, like, number crunching for the most part. Just get, like, what you want. Like, how long you want all of this stuff to be. Get it out, written out. Then just kind of go for it and have some fun. And now that we have our legs bent, well, you could either rotate the root, which I'm going to do that right now, or you could probably rotate the skirt. So I'm going to I'm going to translate the root bone down to right here. So you don't want her feet clipping through the ground because that creates some weird shadow issues. They're not super duper noticeable, but I'm kind of a stickler when it comes to some of these little things. So if you'll notice this little x-axis once I go into the front orthographic by hitting number 1 on the keypad, that little x-axis that we have there is the bottom. That is Z0. So you don't really want to be crossing that, but you want to get as close as you can to it. So there we go. She's pretty much on the floor, and I'm pretty satisfied with that. Going back to that one on the keypad thing, you will have orthographic views that you can switch to at any time. That can be very helpful. So if you'll notice, like, oh, I'm looking at it right now, but I want to see her in a flat perspective, just hit 1, you'll get the front view. If you hit 3, you get the right orthographic view, and if you hit 7, you'll get the top orthographic view. If you want to get the opposite of each of those, then you'll just need to hit 9 on the number pad, and it will rotate around 180 degrees. So if you're in the front and you hit 9, it'll send you to the back. If you're at the right and you hit 9, you'll go to the left. And if you're at the top and you hit 9, you'll go to the bottom. And if you want to have a specific angle that you just want really badly to be flat, then just hit 5 on the number pad, and whatever you're looking at, well, the entire view will become orthographic. Anyways, now that we have that lowered, what we want to do is we want to rotate the skirt bones so they're no longer clipping with the legs, which, rather simple. We just set the 3D cursor to the root bone right there, and we begin rotating it based off that 3D cursor. So we just bump it up a wee bit, and as you can see there, I think that looks pretty darn close to what I want it to be. And usually we can't just edit the front of the skirt and leave the back of the skirt just dangling there without any changes. So usually I'll just kind of like edit it a little bit so it looks closer to how the cloth would look if it was just moving uniformly right there. Yeah, she's squat. She's the Russian. And usually you don't want to move this part of the skirt too far out. Usually, since again we're looking at cloth here, we don't want it clipping obviously, but we also don't want it to go too far out or else it's going to look a little bit weird. So just enough. And if that little bottom part is clipping, not a big deal. No one's going to be like, oh, I'm going to use this animation, and like instantly pause at this exact keyframe and then start zooming in going like, okay, where is it kind of clipping a little bit? Right here? I'm going to leave a thumbs down on the Steam Workshop page. How dare they? By the way, I'm going to change my view clip start 2.001 because I might need to get into the nitty gritty every now and then. Let's put that view box away. Now that we have that, what we want to do is, looks like her spine bone is kind of leaning forward, kind of twisting a little bit so that like those arms can get ready to really turn. So as far as that goes, we now want to move over to the spine bones. And again, we're rotating off of that root bone. So we want to bend her first spine down. Ooh, that's a little bit hard to gauge. Mario's a plump, stout fella, isn't he? And again, this is just something that you'll probably have to work with for a little bit. Animations do take a long time to make, but it's, you know, it's a worthwhile process in my opinion. I wouldn't ever recommend getting... I'd recommend spending like as much time as you can on animation, like smoothing it out, making sure it looks nice before you think, okay, that's good. I'll leave it at that. That's nice. I like that. Because you can always make an animation look better. I mean, obviously there comes a point of diminishing returns, but like there's at least a couple hours worth in even a short animation that you can spend just refining until it looks just chef's kiss. So looks like that spine's really rotated. So we're going to do that. We're going to rotate the spine one a little bit more. So let's put that select cursor back there. Oof. And if you'll notice here, these little seams on the model will show you, and as well as like the model itself, not just the seams, will show you just how well the model is reacting to the bone movements that you're making. You don't ever really want to go too far with some motions because you really want to split it up between bones because the body's kind of limber. Not one bone doesn't handle like all the movements. It's always like a combination of rotations between all your bones. So always try to balance it out. Because if you'll get too much twisting, then that will definitely look weird and that will be noticeable. So don't go too crazy on that. So that's probably good as far as that goes. You'll notice that Mario's shoulder's probably about right here on my mouse. Probably about right there below his ear, right around his cheek. Just probably behind that. So I'm going to say that's probably good spine position. We might want to lift the spine 2 just a wee bit up. Or maybe that's spine 1. Well, we can as sure as heck test it and see how well it looks. Because if you'll notice, if I go back to this view right here, that sort of spine curvature just doesn't look right. And we can always just try to like make it look a little bit nicer. That's not really doing it, so I'm going to see if it's the spine 2. And we can edit it. Since we're only doing movements right now, the placement of where you're moving it from doesn't really matter because you're not really rotating it. So that I think looks a wee bit better. Yeah, I think I like how that movement was a little bit better than what it was before. And you'll also notice that right now the zipper's clipping. We'll take care of that in a little bit. But for now, we want to get the arms properly placed because the arms and the collar specifically are probably one of the most important sections for the cover, because the arms are probably one of the most visible parts on her body other than like her head and like the physics objects like her ponytail and her cape and the zipper. But I personally think if you can get any part of an animation right for like this game or for your mods or whatever, I'd recommend focusing a lot on the arms because the arms will take you very far. So let's try to get that nice little position going. So she has her arm bent upwards. It's also kind of cocked a little bit, so let's kind of rotate it outwards a little bit and rotate a little bit that way. Shoulders don't really rotate that way very much, but you can go a little bit just so you can give a little bit more twisting length on leg, just in case you need to rotate the elbow for something, because the elbow starts to collapse on itself very quickly if you try to rotate it. So let's rotate that a little bit upwards, maybe a little bit inwards, like that. That's probably a decent position. A lot of comparison shots, a lot of just checking. It's a slow process, but it's worth it. I think I want to bend the arm just a wee bit more upwards, and then perhaps rotate this one a little bit more downwards. Yep, I like that. And another thing you might notice that I just did is that when you're selecting these bones, again, I said this a while ago, that when you are selecting bones that are hidden behind your model, you will select other bones by accident sometimes, in which you'll know, well, I'll know usually because the axis will usually be in a different location than I'm used to, which I'll catch pretty quickly naturally. But when you're just starting out, it's easy to notice bone you have by looking up here at the top left where it says what bone you have selected, which right now I have hair R04. Sometimes you'll accidentally select like a spine or something else, but usually, and another way to figure out what you're looking at is by toggling the x-ray, which again, it can be a little hard to tell what you're looking at, but if you just kind of like single out what bone you're trying to find, then be like, okay, I want to use that bone, then just click that one and then untoggle the x-ray or leave the x-ray on. Completely up to you. So now that we have this done, what we want to do is, it looks like Mario's fist is closed, so we're going to make Hatkid's fist closed. Even though Mario doesn't have any fingers unless he's putting up the 2 fingers that he does in the animation, which we will do later, but for now, we can go ahead and put his fist in her hand into a fist. And I'm editing this based off of what the idle positions hands are usually at in that beginning frame. Sometimes you'll want to edit them just based off of the T-pose, the T-posed hands, in which they're just like all of them are just sticking directly out. That's fine too. All you have to do is just select all the bones in her hand, not separately, but you can select them all at once, and then just hit the clear all transformations button by going up to pose and then clear transform all. Let's see, so we're going to keep folding her, putting her hand into a nice little fist, and her hands are pretty janky. They're very low poly, not as low poly as Mario obviously, but compared to what you might think her hands might work, they're very weird. So you'll notice how they just kind of start caving into each other because of how low poly they are, which is fine. It's not going to be very noticeable, and it's just natural with all of her animations. If she has a closed fist, or if she has her arm or hand like wrapping around like her umbrella or something, her fingers do that, so don't worry yourself too much over that. We'll rotate her thumb outwards a little bit more, and then we'll rotate it inwards, and then we'll give her nice thumb. We will rotate that inwards like that, and maybe rotate this first finger in just a wee bit. Maybe do that as well for the middle finger. There we go. That's a closed fist. And again, it might look really jank from the bottom, but from this perspective, it looks fine. And this is just how her hand looks, so it's alright. So now what we want to do is, you'll notice how the arm is clipping with your collar. In order to fix that, this is a bad perspective, so I'm just going to go ahead and hide the head for now by going up here and clicking the little eye icon. And we're going to get her collar so that it's not clipping anymore. I've seen a couple animations so far in which her arms clip with her cape. I'm not sure how noticeable that is to other people, but again, I'm a stickler on this sort of thing, so whenever I see it, I'm like, no, why? Why have you done this? Her collar did nothing to you. There we go, I'm editing the hair bone. Like a goof. Darn it. And sometimes the collar will be very difficult with you a lot. That's normal. It's just kind of a jerk sometimes. So what you'll want to do is be careful that it doesn't clip against itself, which is what I'm doing with it right now. Try to have it not do that as much as possible. You'll notice that it's still clipping. Shoot. It just takes a lot of trial and effort usually to make sure that it doesn't clip. So if I rotate like that, then it's just kind of only sort of clipping right there at the elbow. When it's clipping like that, it's a lot less noticeable than what it was before. That's not to say that it's perfect. It's a lot better than what it's a lot better than what it once was, though. And usually you have 3 bones to work with on either side. You have the cloak back, the cloak top, and the cloak front. These 3 bones will be extremely helpful in getting these positions to where you want them to be. Do you generally use the graph editor? I do use the graph editor. The graph editor will come in later, though. I will explain further on that once we get these major keyframes in, because I can't really show much without any keyframes. But yeah, it's just like a trial and error process with these cloak bones. So usually if a part of the collar doesn't look right, just kind of mess around with it a little bit, try to rotate it on a single axis, and then if that doesn't change it, try rotating it on another axis, and then if none of that fixes it, try working with a different bone. Just experiment with it a lot. It takes a lot of experimentation before you're used to it. And trust me, believe me, her collar is very hard to work with at times. And another thing you'll notice is that, okay, yeah, this looks fine or whatever, but again, you still have that clipping at the elbow, which normally would be fine. Again, this is a part where I might start scaling a bone instead to prevent the clipping. So this kind of just shrinks it a little bit so it clips less. So what I want to do is perhaps like shrink it down to maybe like that side, the cloak top, and then maybe bring it out a little bit so it's no longer like touching that part. Like that, probably. Maybe in a little bit. Nope, that does not look good at all. Or maybe I can rotate it in and then out. Yeah, that looks a little bit better. And you'll notice how now it's kind of like it's collapsing into itself. You can try to alleviate that. That's just another issue as far as it goes. And again, just takes a lot of trial and effort, trial and error. I can't even speak properly. So I'd say that looks generally fine, actually. You'll notice that it's still clipping, but it's really hard to notice, and it only happens on like the inside of her model, which won't really be seen. That's not to say that you shouldn't like spend effort to try and get animations looking as smoothly as possible. I'm stumbling over my words. It's fine to sort of let things happen behind the scenes. If it looks janky, if it's like hidden behind something else, then it's much more okay left alone than a part that's more easily seen, is what I'm trying to say. So I'd say that's a pretty decent position for that fist. So let's move on to what would probably be the other arm, which you can't see at all, but this is one of those moments when I would roll out my chair, get up, and put that position for myself. And for me, doing that position right now, his arm would be probably close to the position that it's in now. Maybe a little bit slightly more bent and behind her back. Again, with a closed fist. So let's get to work on that. So we'll select her arm, rotate it out, right? We rotate it inwards a little bit. Select her arm L03. And this one isn't going to be as exaggerated of a movement as that right arm is going to be. And that's alright. It'll make it a little bit easier to animate this one. This will be a much faster one than the previous arm. And another thing you might notice is that when I have this little axis edit thing up, the little, yeah, you know what I'm talking about, this nice little bubble, you'll notice that there's also a white line. That's if you want to rotate based off of your current viewing angle. So if I wanted to rotate based off of this angle, just grab the white and rotate it off of that. Pretty simple, sometimes useful. Normally recommend going off of normals again, but sometimes rotating it off of your viewing angle is very helpful. And again, figuring out what's best for your own animation process is what I would recommend. You don't have to follow exactly everything that I do. This is just to get your toes dipped. So now that we have our nice little, that's pretty close. You don't have to have her hand completely collapsed, because again, it's not gonna be easily noticeable if it's not completely collapsed. I just like to be really thorough with these things. So fold that in, fold that. Ooh, what in the world was that? This might be a time when I'll use the viewing angle instead. Rotate a little bit upward, a little bit more, and then rotate it just a little bit more that way. That's probably good. I think I like that position. And you notice that it's kind of clipping a little bit with the cape. So we're going to take that little cloak back, rotate it upwards a little bit. And even if it's not clipping, you'll just have to take this logically speaking, how like this is supposed to be cloth. So you'll try to mimic its movement as much as possible. You can't really mimic its physics. That's pretty heckin' hard to do. But what you can do is tell yourself, okay, well, compared to what the arm's original position was, the cloth definitely wouldn't just be frozen in time right here. So let's move it a little bit in tandem with where the arm now is. So we're going to rotate that out a little bit. And another thing you might want to be careful for is that usually you will want to be rotating, animating a lot of different parts, even if they don't look like they directly demand an animation. So even if a movement might be really not obvious, you should still keyframe a movement like that anyways. Specifically for the sake of the fact that if something is static for too long in an animation, and too long can come very quickly, then it will stand out. It will stand out as being oddly enough like something that's just completely still. Like for example, I've seen a couple animations that like the cape, even if the arms don't clip, the cape is completely frozen. It looks like someone like I don't know, they dunked Hat Kid in water and stuck the collar in a freezer, and then put it right back on her, and it just looks awkward. And again, I'm a little bit of a stickler on that, but I feel like that would probably be semi noticeable. Let's go ahead and rotate that in a little bit. And I'd say that's a pretty decent collar. You'll notice how it's like clipping right there, but the further in we go towards the zipper, the more difficult it is to edit the collar, because at that point it's just sort of weighted to the spine bone. So not much we can do there, so we're just going to kind of leave it there. Yeah, here we go in the Twitch chat. Future Type says that it drives him crazy when people just leave your cape collar sticking straight out. I agree. I agree. And you'll notice here that like with this frame that I have right now that I'm almost done, since I have like the arms are the biggest part usually. We still have like the head, the collar, not the collar, the zipper, and the cape to do. Which the cape can sometimes be accomplished by the physics, which the physics only apply to the cape if you have that setting enabled, which I don't think I do. So you should probably try to at least animate the cape as much as you can. And this thing kind of, it doesn't move like cloth does normally, but you can try to like simulate it as best you can by just like kind of like folding it in, editing how it's rotated like that, maybe a little bit. Rotate that out maybe a wee bit. Maybe rotate that out. And perhaps rotate that just a little bit more. So see, when I have the cape keyframe like this a little bit more, even though the position is completely still and it's not moving right now, this cape's position specifically indicates that there's motion. So I really like getting in that like little exaggerated kind of like little cape pose, because she's just reeling back and she's ready to spin. And we will like edit the ponytail as well, so that's going to be down and probably well, hold on, let's see. If she's turning like that, then yeah, her ponytail will be following suit, just less so. Or maybe the cape would be the other way. The cape actually might be going the other way now that I think about it. Like the angle should be going this way instead, I believe. So we're gonna change that right now before I screw anything else up. Because again, you have to base the position based off of where she's coming from. So since it's gonna be coming from a certain position, so it's gonna kind of follow along in like a little snake. I wouldn't call it a snake-like pattern, but it's not following still. It's going from top to bottom, because top is where the action is starting from, and then because that's where it's connected to Hat Kid, and then it's just gonna the movement of the cape is gonna be influenced by that. So that's what we kind of want to mimic there. And try to get your cape looking as nice as you can. Sometimes it can get a little wonky. Yeah, I'm not really a huge fan of how twisted this bad boy is right now. Not a huge fan at all. I hate the capes so much. Why don't we get one of the devs in here and have him ban you? I just love how like the community at least is open enough to complain about the models and like all the other assets in the game that we have to work with. And I want to emphasize the words have to. Because sometimes it does feel like a chore getting to work with these. Sometimes. So now we want to animate probably her hair just a little bit. Because if her hair stands still, that's probably just bad a contender as with the collar. So let's animate that out just a little bit. Maybe that was a little too far. I'm selecting the wrong bones again. There we are. Yeah, I think I like that. And we can edit the zipper out. And that one's, let's see, if she's twisting like that, then it'll probably be trying to come up from the neutral position, but should also be hitting your body like that. Or maybe, yeah, because this object weighs more, so it's kind of rotating off of that. Yeah, I think I like that. So, from what I can see, actually, wait, hold on, we need to rotate the head, because your head's still basically rotated forward. Maybe rotate the hair in a little bit more then, since it's not being that influenced by her movements. Still need to fix the fact that the hair is now clipping with the collar. So there we have it. Perfect. I would say that that actually looks like a pretty darn good keyframe. So this is probably our first major keyframe in which she's, reeling in to spin around. So once we have all of our bones selected, all we need to do is select them all by hitting A, and then hitting I, and then going whole character. Now we can get into the, what do I call it? The action editor. So, one moment. I need to take a drink. Talking a lot makes me thirsty. Drink up, gamers. Okay. So, once you have more than one keyframe in your animation, you'll notice that some of these, since you have like each of these bones separated by like their own little nice bar in this like almost spreadsheet sort of fashion, you'll notice that some of these have like nothing in between them, and then some of these have like this little orange bar, which this perfectly fine. I think it's actually a rather simple explanation. If it doesn't have anything in between these two frames, that means that there is a change in position, rotation, scale. There is a change somewhere in it between those two frames. And if there's an orange bar, that means there's absolutely no change. So that means, for example, with this Bip Ponytail 3, from frame 1 to frame 21, that bone specifically is not moving whatsoever. I mean, it's obviously receiving movement from other bones, but there's no animation data specifically attached to that bone. So that's that. Now we can move on to explain why I have this graph editor open on the left. So if you zoom in, it looks like we have a lot of spaghetti. That's perfectly fine, because we have all of our bones selected right now, and with whatever bones we have selected will show up in this graph editor. So let's take, for example, right now, I want to have just my root showing up, and I want all my lines to show up as well. So with just the root selected, we can now zoom in to see what sort of data is saved to this keyframe. And at any times, even if, again, since it shows that little yellow bar saying, oh, this part didn't change, that means that your animation data is saved, even if there is no change between keyframes. So even if I didn't edit the location or the scale, it's still recording the data of the scale is still 1, the scale is still 1, the scale is still 1, the location is still this, look, the rotation is still this. It has 10 values right here, since I'm editing in the quaternion axes. So you have the XYZ locations, the XYZ scales, and the W, X, Y, and Z quaternions. And if for those of you who don't know, a quaternion is 90 degrees. So when we're looking at this graph here, you might be curious as to think, okay, what the heck? There's a 0, there's a 1, there's a 2, there's a 3, there's a 4. Okay, that basically means, as far as quaternions go, that if you go up 1, then that's rotating 90 degrees on that axis. If you go up to 2, then that's 180, 3, 270. You can go up infinitely for all blended cares. It's just data. But obviously, the further you go up, the more exaggerated it's going to be, and it's going to look kind of funky, unless you really want to make an animation of her spinning at like 70,000 rotations a second, which I don't even know how well that would look, because she's probably just gonna be blinking around like crazy. But back to the subject at hand. Let's not animate her rotating at 70,000 times per second. So what we want to do for this root bone here, we didn't rotate it at all, but we did move it. We didn't scale it either. So what we can do is hide all of the lines that we did not edit, which should be all of these rotation ones. And it appears that the only one that's changing in the location is the X one. So we have singled out this specific these two specific frames for this animation. So you'll notice that at frame 1 it's at 0, and then once we're down to frame 21 we're down to like this almost -6 position here. So what you'll notice is at the end of these two frames you'll see like there's these two little dots that are hollowed out. This is because there are different forms of interpolation. So like I said earlier, the default interpolation between frames is going to be Bezier right here, which when you have Bezier, what you can do with these is say to yourself, okay, I want the smoothing on this to be there, or I want to bend it this way and have it come back, or I want it to go straight up. And you have a lot of options as far as Bezier goes. It's very customizable, very easy to use. Then what you can do with Bezier is you can change the handle type as well. So if you have like another frame attached, you'll notice that like if I change the position of this line, the other part of the Bezier will also change accordingly, which can be a bit of a problem if you have a frame after that, because that little handle will affect how the next frame interpolates. So what you can do, if you want to isolate that, you can change the handle type to free, and then you'll notice how now that handle has now changed to accommodate, and now you can rotate this one wherever you please, and it will not affect the other handle. But right now we're just going to do that. What you can also do is, if we can get out of here, with the entire keyframe selected in the graph editor, you can change the easing type. You can change it to ease in, ease out, ease in and out, or automatic easing, which this is not really that visible as far as Bezier goes. So if I change it to ease in, doesn't really change anything because it's Bezier. It's smoothing them based off of the two little handles you have. But, for example, you have other forms of interpolation like constant. I don't recommend using constant because that immediately goes from one frame to the next without movement at all. So if I change it to constant, you'll see that the position is, again, it's constant all the way up until it hits 21, in which, look at the character, bop, 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 bop. There's no smoothing at all. So I did use constant interpolation when I made the Club Penguin dance, but if you export any animation data to an FBX file, it will not retain that interpolation. It will automatically change it to linear, which is just that. It's linear. It just goes straight there, no smoothing, no acceleration. And if someone really does want constant interpolation, I can explain that further. I can explain it for you. I won't explain it for you here. That's a topic for another time, and I really doubt you're going to need it because, frankly, I don't think it's very useful outside of replicating a dumb animation like the Club Penguin dance. So if you do want me to explain it further, find me in just ask me in the Discord. You can also change the easing, which will basically say, okay, instead of me getting all these handlebars to change, I want to change it to have sinusoidal. So now you'll notice that it's like, oh, okay, so now it's going like smooth, and then it's like speeding up really fast, and then it's hitting that point. And this is where that time came into play, where I hit the easing type, I hit ease in. So it's kind of easing into the animation, and then it's going full speed, and it doesn't slow down before hitting that next frame. And as far as this goes, I have both of these selected right now. That's not necessary. If you have this frame selected, it will affect the movement from that frame over to the next one specifically. It won't change the one before it. So if I have both of these selected then and I hit ease in, it will affect the movement from this frame to this frame and movement from this frame to whatever frame I put in next. So right now we're just gonna edit this one frame. I need another drink. Okay. So what we can do right now is so again, we have the interpolation mode set to sinusoidal, and we can change it back to automatic easing, which, wait, what? Do you have to have both of them selected? I could have sworn that you only had to have one. Hold on. Okay, no. I think that just has to do with the fact that it's hard to see. I think that is smoothing out just a little bit, just not as much because it's like sinusoidal and whatnot. So what if we have ease out? Yeah, there we go. So if we have ease out selected, then you'll see that it starts out the fastest it will be going. It starts out at the maximum speed, and then it begins to like slowly smooth out into like that last position. It slows down. But if you'll notice right here, because right now we're just gonna play the animation how we have it now to see how Hat Kid's animating to that point. So you'll notice right now, pretty easily, she clips through the floor majorly while she's interpolating between these two frames. That's normal. Things like this happen all the time, that you'll notice that, oh shoot, even though like these two frames were made with very well intentions, the interpolation makes it look like garbage. That's fine. If you can't fix it via changing the interpolation type, then what you can just do is add in between frames. So usually when it's something like the root's position, usually I don't screw with the interpolation at all. I usually will just be like, okay, next frame, she's clipping a little bit. Go back to the global axis, raise her up. That looks good. Keyframe it, next, and then raise her up, keyframe it, next, raise her up, keyframe it, next. Simple as that. But for the sake of this, we're going to show off the other interpolation types. So you can change it to quadratic as well. And you'll notice the higher that we get in this interpolation mode, the harsher the graph line is going to get. So hopefully you'll be able to see that when I select cubic, and then it gets even more intense. And then we're going to go ahead and select quartic, even more intense. And then we have quintic, which is the most intense that this gets. All right, bye Kuname, if that's how you, I'm hoping that's how you pronounce that. Thanks for dropping by. And then you have these other two, which are exponential and circular, which are a little different. You'll notice how these the sinusoidal to quintic are relatively, well, they're all kind of grouped together. You can see because that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, they're the exponents in the specific graph function that they use. But then when you have something like exponential, it's exactly that, the movement's exponential, and you'll notice how it's a little bit smoother than quintic. And then you can also use circular, which you'll notice is just a lot smoother when it goes through. And what you decide, what kind of interpolation you decide to use between a frame on a certain movement is completely up to you, of whether or not you think it looks better. Which it's again a lot of trial and effort. It's a slow process, but it's just one after the other of, okay, I want to change this to see if this will look better, and then you're like, okay, that looks better, next. Then you just change a bunch of things to make slight little improvements until you have a nice looking animation. So for now, I do actually want to change these back to Bezier, just in case I want to go back later. I don't really want that to be changed just yet. Yeah, Soren, you should go to bed. You live in Europe, you crazy boy. Good night. So Now that we have that, we're going to probably create another keyframe. We're about an hour and 20 minutes into the stream. I'm going to probably only be going another 40 minutes, trying to cover as many more bases that I can, as well as fitting it into the editor itself. So I'm not going to finish the animation, it appears, but I'm going to put in the next keyframe, and then after that next keyframe, we might edit a couple of the graph lines, and then after that, we're definitely going to show how to get your animation into the editor once it's done. The animation process is not this short. Unless you're making like a single pose, like I know some of the JoJo poses on the workshop. Those are, I believe, are a single keyframe. That's fine, I guess. I mean, whatever works, whatever floats y'all's boat is whatever. I'm just not my thing really. But usually my animations take, the most simplest ones take around 4 hours, and that's, I know what I'm doing for the most part. Club Penguin Dance took 4 hours. The Floss took 4 hours. Some of the animations for Elsie's Hat Kid Steals the Declaration of Independence 2, a couple of those took 2 to 3 hours. Longest one I did was the Default Dance. That took 25 to 30 hours, I think. But yeah, I'd recommend taking a decent amount of time on each of these animations just to refine them. I know I've said that as ad nauseum, but I really can't stress that enough. So, moving on, we want to know what our next keyframe is going to look like. So it looks like he reels in and then he starts spinning around. So we want to sort of replicate that pose that he's got right there. I'd say that's about the exact same length as the last keyframe. So I'm going to go ahead and switch to 41. Yep, that's another 20 frames. Fantastic. And that's going to be where our next keyframe is going to be. So let's get to work on that. And you'll notice now that he's kind of in some positions that she was in originally, because, you know, she's reeling in and now she's going right back through that original pose where she's facing forward and her back is pretty much straight, or we're going to call it straight even though it's not really in the animation here. This is one of the moments that I wouldn't call it laziness, I'd call it efficiency. We don't have to edit the skeleton based off of what the last keyframe was. Sometimes it's much easier to make another keyframe based off of a keyframe before the current one. So personally, I think I want to reconstruct this position based on her idle pose, which will be fine. So all I have to do is go back to this idle frame, select all the bones and copy them, and then move right back up to frame 41 and paste the pose. And again, this has not been saved yet, so there is no animation data for this frame. There's simply the pose that I'm editing. So if I ever hit play or if I change frames, it's going to erase whatever I've done. So, but again, if you accidentally erase it, all you have to do, Control Z, and you'll be back to where you were. So now what we want to do is, oh shoot, open Discord. Now what we want to do is get that nice little position. So her back is straight and up, and it looks like her arms are kind of out and bent a little bit. I think the biggest part right now that we need to cover is the fact that her legs are, I'd say they're actually about bent how they are right now, as far as like angled away from each other. So let's get that nice little position where she's kind of like, she's spinning on her foot. She's spinning on her foot. So that's what we're gonna try to replicate. She is gonna have her leg bent a little bit, just for the sake of not looking like she's just in her idle pose. So let's bend that in, let's bend that out, let's bend that out just a little bit more. I'd say that looks nice-ish. Maybe bend that leg back in just a little bit more. Yes, yes, yes. There we go. I'd say that's a pretty decent pose for that leg. And then we want to probably swing that leg back a little bit. So we do want to have it angled just a little bit forward. We want to have this bent backwards. And she's going to be pointing her foot back, considering if you are spinning on your leg, that's just kind of what you are going to be doing with your foot. Okay. Again, her leg is a little bit more turned out than that one is, so we're going to turn it just a wee bit. Actually, Actually, I want to bend it a little bit inwards more. Because she's just going to try to start building up momentum. And this does look awkward, but again, this is technically considered something like an in-between frame. So it's not going to look really all that bad once she's actually moving. So now you notice that her cape's clipping a little bit, so we're gonna make sure to fix that by editing this via the 3D cursor on the root. Bend that a little bit forward, bend this a little bit back. Looks dandy. And I think how it kind of looks like he's a little bit tilted over, like in a little arc that way. So I think I kind of want to replicate that part as well. We don't want to make her look too straight and narrow. And again, we do want to rotate based off of that spine. And we don't want to do too much. Maybe just a smidgen on each bone. So let's switch that over to that bone, and then we want to edit. Oh wait, we want to edit. Oh wait, did I just edit the spine too? Which one did I edit? Oh, I was editing them based off of spine 1. What a fool. What a fool. What a fool. That's fine. So let's just switch it over to the root real quick. Okay, she's already rotated. I'm just gonna call that good then, I guess. And now what we can do is rotate her arms upward into that nice little, I wouldn't call that I don't know if that would be a relevé or not. It's been a while since I've done ballet. Don't ask me about ballet. It's only been like half a year. So, and I think we probably want, I know that I would have considered these to be closed fists, but I think I actually kind of I'm going to want to take some liberties here because Mario doesn't have fingers on this model, but I think that if he did have fingers, he would have them probably outstretched actually, in kind of like a little whimsical spinning motion, because that is what he is doing, so might as well just kind of make it my own for a little bit. Because obviously, even if you do use a reference for an animation, so you can like copy something and put it into HAT just because you're like, oh, this will be fun if this was an animation, you will be taking some liberties anyways, just because you can't directly perfectly copy an animation in. No matter how hard you try, there's going to be some differences, even if they are minor or hardly noticeable. So, this is actually kind of closer to her idle pose for her, as far as her hands go at least. So, if you wanted to do something like this, then it actually might be better if you just switch them to idle first. I'm not going to at this point because I'm already basically there. Ooh, I don't like how that one rotated. Maybe rotate this finger just a little bit more out. And maybe rotate that one just a little bit more out. Yep. I think I like that. Maybe rotate the collar just a little bit upwards. Rotate that out. That's good. And then probably rotate. We want to get a similar position with her other arm. Not the exact same one, but maybe a little bit lower. Or, actually no, it's just kind of more bent upwards actually. So we're going to have that part bent lower, and then we're going to have this part bent a little bit upwards. Yeah, I think I like how that looks. And again, just kind of eyeballing things, seeing how it looks to you is really what's important, because animations are purely visual, so you should be basing it off of how you see it, how you perceive it. I do like that specifically. Probably bend her arm in a little bit actually. Maybe bend the collar just a little bit out to accommodate. Alright, that looks nice. And we do want to have her fingers outstretched as well. So that's what we're going to do. is we're going to outstretch our nice little fingers. These things look bad even when they're not, like, bent. I am so much not a fan of these fingers. Animating them is fine. Just the models themselves are, oof. They're rough. They are rough. Little square doodles. That's why all my costumes and future costumes and playable characters will not be using hands such as these. They will be using hands of my own design. Hands and arms of my own design. But I digress. I am simply making small talk in the middle of my casual work. And I hope this doesn't bother anyone that I'm talking this much. I'm not trying to, like, fill a gap as much as I'm just trying to deliver as much information as I possibly can that I think might be even the slightest bit helpful. Ooh, that might be too far. Yeah, those are way too far out. I should probably bring those in a little bit. Yep, that looks nice. And usually what I try to do for my own animations, Hat Kid's outfit, I'm personally not a fan of the fact that the sleeves are so far on her. So usually I'll just kind of draw them back a little bit just to give her hands a moment in the spotlight. And usually it'll help with clipping as well if you bring them back just a little bit. And it doesn't look that bad either. Especially when it's animating, people do not notice such a slight change. It's just nice in my opinion. So again, we have to be considering that this is in the middle of her own movement, so we will have to consider the fact that these physics objects will be in motion. So that's what we're going to do right now, is try to simulate that as much as we can. So they're coming, so she's coming from that previous position where she's like down and crouched, so we kind of want these parts to kind of be flowing out from that sort of kind of position that she was in. Yep, I think that looks nice. No, that's the wrong way. And then we can rotate that inwards. And again, I might have actually screwed up the cape a second time. I might have actually had it right the first time for all I know. But again, once you go back and look at the animation itself and just kind of observe it for a little bit, you'll notice any errors you've made that you want to correct, which could involve major changes. It's not that big of a deal if it's major. Just, you know, if just correct it, then try to be better next time about not making the same mistake again. It's a learning process above all things. So, yep, I think this looks pretty decent. Maybe want to bend the spine up, actually, just a little bit. Off of the spine 1 specifically. Just a little bit. Because she's supposed to be looking like she's spinning. She looked like she was bending down just a little bit there. I'd say that's another complete keyframe, and that one just took way less time because it's pretty close to her idle animation, her idle pose. And again, that was a much more efficient choice than if I was trying to get the position that I'm in right now from that keyframe that I just made, where she's like all scrunched up and bent over and stuff like that. This is a much more efficient way to animate. So I'll put that keyframe in. And now we have a total of 3 keyframes, which is lovely, especially for how much time we've spent already. 1 hour and 36 minutes. Not bad, especially for the fact that I've probably only been animating for half of it, and the other half I've just been yapping the whole dang time. So let's go ahead and watch it all the way through just for the heck of it, just to see how we're looking right now. So if you'll notice, that was less than a second of animation that we just spent over an hour on. that's normal. And you'll also notice that the movements don't look as exaggerated as you might want them to be, and that's alright, because you can always go back to a frame and you can be like, okay, I want her to be way more bent over than that, or I want her to be way more twisted on like her spine specifically. Then all you gotta do, cursor just selected, and then you have that bip spine, bend it over, twist it more. And again, this is one of those moments that, like, you're just editing one single bone. This is at one of those moments where, okay, look, well, first of all, I'm on frame 22, and that's a big no-no, so we want to copy that bone's pose, move back to frame 21, and paste it. This is one of the moments that I would recommend hitting I and going whole character selected bones only, because you're only editing, like, a single bone. So I would just change that real quick. And then that would probably improve the motion just a little bit. But it's the little things that go a long way. See? I think that looks way better than what it did just a second ago. And again, she's going to be like moving, spinning a lot. And yeah, just like Dave Frost just said in the chat, I'm going to read it out word for word. That might be one of the most important lessons. Animation is very time consuming, especially if you want to pay attention to detail. Yeah, you could be spending hours and hours and hours on an animation that'll only last a couple seconds. Yeah, that's how animation works. It's pretty tedious if you look at it that way, but it's just kind of like a slow build up to a product that you are just really happy with. Just makes you kind of want to squee with joy, I guess you could say. So this is kind of one of the moments that you could change interpolation. I won't go too deep into it because, again, it's very trial and error. But if you'll notice, like, how right here, I think I'm going to personally try to just fix how the root is right now. And that might not be possible with just changing the interpolation. But I can sure as heck try. And if you'll notice, I didn't change the root's position right there. So I'm going to fix that real quick by going back to global, because she is going to be rotating on that foot like she's a little ballerina. So we're going to change that, and we're going to go whole character, select bones only. And look, now that changed a little bit on the graph. She's a little bit higher up there. And again, they're defaulted to Bezier, but then when you'll notice that when she's moving, she's clipping in that process, which is fine. We'll try to figure out how we can... We'll try to see if any of the other interpolation modes would better suit this specific movement. So if I want to change it to sinusoidal, looks like that's even worse. We might have to go Bezier and just change it, but for now we'll know that if we go any higher, they're just going to get even more intense. They're just going to get even worse clipping. So we're just going to go ahead and skip the other ones of these easing types. Exponential's really tough, and so is circular. So we're just going to go back to Bezier. We're going to try to get this as perfect as we can. But as far as positioning with the root goes, I normally wouldn't try to fix it with just interpolating. Because that's, oof. That actually is pretty good for the most part. You'll notice that it's really close, and you can just zoom in as well if you want to. It's really close. So let's probably try to find it at its furthest point away. Probably right there. Probably want to change this one's interpolation as well. So probably just want to bring it straight out a little bit, like that, and that might. Just a little bit too far, so let's try to... oh, no, we don't want to bring that up. Let's just undo that last part. I think that's about as close as we're going to get on that side. So we're going to go ahead and change the next one's interpolation. So let's go ahead and edit that. Let's get where the... usually you'll try to find where the worst frame is. As far as the clipping goes, so you're going to try to get it above the x-axis line right there by finding where it goes the furthest over the line, and you're just going to try to correct that one by extending it. Yeah, see right there, it kind of smooths in. That's pretty good as far as clipping goes, so I think I'm going to leave it right there. Usually, Bezier can be pretty helpful, but every now and then, like sinusoidal and all those other easing types can be helpful as well. As well as if you wanted to change the fact that you want, oh, I want it to be going as fast as possible. So if you have a specific part where she actually like leaps into the air and comes back down, what I would recommend between those two keyframes is from the position where she's on the ground to the position where she's at the highest point in the air. I would change that easing type to ease out specifically because she is being affected by gravity. So she's going to be at her highest speed going upwards at the moment she leaves the ground, which means that every single second that she's in the air, she's going to be slowly slowing down until she reaches the top of her jump, at which point she's going to be falling down. So that means that from the top of her jump back down to when she hits the ground, I would go ease in instead, because you're kind of slowly speeding up until you're going at that maximum speed towards the ground, at which point you could like give her like another animation where she's like bouncing or something like that, which I have done and I can't really show off because that's a spoiler for a project that I'm not allowed to discuss. But yeah, you can't just have her like leap into the air and then come back down with like flat feet, no bouncing. Because again, well, first of all, that's not natural to just come back down and do like no like kind of shock absorption with like her legs or like leaping or something like that. And also because again, you're going for that sort of cartoony vibe that the game does offer. So if she does just kind of like recoil it with just her legs and like nothing else, then that is going to look a little, it's going to clash a little bit with the game's style. So lots of things to consider, but it's not that big of a deal because you can just always edit things later. But it is always a good idea to try to think things through before you do them the first time, so you're not going back and changing everything later. So now that we have what we have currently, I've been streaming for long enough, so I'm going to, first of all, we're gonna stop right here. I'm not going to finish the animation on the stream, but what we are going to do is we're going to export it as FBX. And if you imported the skeleton in a different way so that the bones are straight and actually look like a legitimate skeleton, then you're going to need to change your export settings as well, because you would have had to change your import settings in order to get the bones straight. However, I use default settings when I import HatKid's model. So that means that I just need default settings when I export them as well. So what I can do is go right here to the armature, add leaf bones, always turn that off. I hate that setting. Bake animation, and then we also do want to title it, so I'm gonna name it SM64 star, and then just gonna, why not? We're just gonna export it to the desktop. And now we're going to go ahead and boot up the editor and to get the animation ported in. So let's launch that bad boy. While that's loading in, are there any questions as far as what I've covered so far, or anything that I probably haven't covered yet that any of you want to know? We've probably got at least a solid minute and a half or two for me to answer any questions or show anything off that you'd like me to. I mean, if not, I'll just sit here sipping tea. I don't mind. I mean, if y'all aren't asking questions, that's either because nothing's coming to mind, or I've explained everything so darn good that it's impossible to not know everything about animation already. Do you have time to show the animation in the editor? Yes, that's what we're gonna go ahead and do right now. It's going to look pretty similarly to how it looks right now in its current state, except obviously she's gonna be textured. And I will be able to show off as well, like the fact that it automatically does not like translating any bones. So yeah. And if there are any other animations y'all do want me to show off, I definitely can. Because I do have those. I obviously do have those files on hand. I'm not sure how edifying they might be towards the learning process, though. Could you please hurry up, editor? I don't even know if people would watch this on YouTube. If I do ever make an actual tutorial for animation for like the Steam Workshop, like one that would actually go in as a tutorial, there would probably be a decent amount of text. I probably wouldn't be able to use this stream's VOD as a basis for any videos that go up onto that workshop tutorial. But I would just have to probably re-record like a lot of different little snippets of details that I think are important. Because I don't think many people would be that into watching a 2-hour tutorial. Most of the time, whenever new people come into the have you done any original animations? If so, what are the things you would consider? I have done some original animations. Well, I guess it would depend on what you define by original. One of the original animations I'm again not allowed to discuss right now because that's a secret project. The other two, well, one of them would be the codec call from for Hat Kid Steals the Declaration of Independence 2. Oh, the VOD's enabled. Don't worry about that. It's gonna happen. Don't worry about that. Is the editor gonna ever come up? Well, anyways, where was I? Yes, so with the codec call for Hat Kid Steals the Declaration of Independence 2, that specifically obviously was based off of the Metal Gear Solid 3 codec call screen. However, the animation specifically, I didn't go off of a reference. I got like a basic position for how Hat Kid would be like kneeling, which didn't look anything close to how Snake does, because Snake actually is actually properly proportioned as a human male. Not like this weird plumpy child. But I also had to, from what I could see from some footage that I watched, the animation itself is very reactionary to what the situation is and what the dialogue is. Other than that, he usually stays still. And I was like, I don't really like that. So I just kind of went with my own thing and just decided, okay, I want her to have like this, I want her to breathe throughout the entire animation. And then I also want her to look that direction, then look back, then wait for a couple seconds, then look up, then in another direction, and then back, and then wait for a couple seconds, and then look in another direction, and then look back, and then the animation repeats. That animation is about 18 seconds long in total. It was very easy to make, though, because it's an idle animation, not like a very active one. But I would consider that pretty original. The other one would be in another one of the videos that... Oh, actually, no, I don't know if Elsie posted that one yet, so I don't know if I'm allowed to talk about it. Yeah, no, she hasn't showed off the intro yet. Never mind, I don't think I'm allowed to talk about that one either. I would consider plenty of other original animations. Usually, no one's really asked me for any animations outside of what Elsie has asked me for so far. Probably because not a lot of people need custom animations as far as their map goes. Either that or they don't consider them because, again, it's not really a huge section of modding currently. But I would think that I could do just about any animation for Hat Kid as long as it's not too crazy. Because I did also make that Doom pose in the title card for that level, where she's like holding Bo Kid with like that Demon Slayer sword in her hands. She's got like Bo Kid by the neck, or I guess that would be a shapeshifter in the form of Bo Kid. She's not gonna actually kill Bo Kid. Yes. Oh no. Yeah. No. I have seen some of your animations as well, Boo. And yeah, I'm not gonna. Okay, the fact that I'm stuttering makes it sound like I'm about to say they're bad. They're not. I actually do like the animations you've made so far. They're quite nice, and I don't expect you to ask me for anything. I'm glad that you're attending though, because at least that means that hopefully I might be able to extend some knowledge over to you that you might not have known before. So, okay, now that we are in the editor, you might have seen other places where they've explained how to import animations, but for now, we're going to do a pretty brief rundown. So you'll probably already have a package for your mod at this point. If it's just like an animation, then you will have to create a new package. For now, though, we're not going to worry about saving the package, naming the package, anything. This is necessary stuff. You will have to name your package. My package is a generic name, and if you do actually upload a mod with the package, my package, named like that, then it will conflict with probably a lot of other mods that decided to leave that name alone. Don't do that, please. For now, though, since I'm not saving this package, I don't care. So we're just going to name... So since we're creating a new thing, it's by default AnimSet, because AnimSet is the top alphabetically. And we're just going to name it. You could name it whatever. So I'm going to name it Funny Twitch Animation. That was way too long. I don't care. So once that's open, it defaults to the airship. Again, it's alphabetical. We can just go Hat Kid head. Then we can add her extra mesh Hat Kid body. And then we can add the last one, Hat Kid legs. And there we go. We have Hat Kid. And now we go to NM, go to File, Import FBX Animation, and then we'll go down to the file that we just created. Funny. And now we have our little animation in here. And you will notice that she is now rotated really weirdly. That's okay. Since I use the default settings, I know exactly how to rotate her so that she looks proper. So 90 on the Z-axis. Then if you like change frames, then you'll notice she changes where she needs to. She doesn't update any rotations that you add until you change the frame. Then we'll rotate her 90 on the X-axis. And now she'll be straight up. But you'll also notice that she's clipping through the floor. And that's alright. All we have to do is just apply root translation. On the Z-axis, 25.3 is just about as close as I've gotten it. You could probably get more exact with that. I have her hovering above the ground just a smidgen, so I'll probably lower her by about -0.05. Yeah, there we go. That's nice. That's nice looking. And again, it's so close that no one's going to notice. So now that we're here, I'm going to show the animation how it is currently. So you might notice, look at that right there. What on earth is going on here? We have animation rotation only set currently. And if we turn that off, you'll notice that she moves quite a bit. So if I have animation rotation only on, you'll see it's pretty darn jank because it's not using any of the translation data we gave it, which the translation data would probably apply to the root, the skirt front and back, probably the spine 1 and 2, as well as possibly a couple other bones like in the cape, possibly. I always recommend turning animation rotation only off. And when you'll do it, it does say warning will be broken in game. It needs to be recompressed. Easy to fix. Right click on it and click re-zero on current position. Boom, done. Again, another thing you might notice. Let's see if we move here. No, I think that about covers it actually. So yeah, so we go through the animation, and again. And again, and if you'll notice right here at the top, it says keyframe count 41, 61.5 keys per second. It does kind of differ a little bit from what we had in Blender, but it's not far off enough for anyone to notice, so it's fine. I might finish this animation in my off time. Again, like the crash dance, not sure yet. I do have plenty of other things on my plate. Another thing that you'll notice, you'll have other things right here, like use translation bone names, force mesh translation bone names, use scale bone names, and force mesh scale bone names. So use translation says the names of the bones that should use translation if animation rotation only is set. So these will only apply if this is on. This is the list of bones which are always going to use their translation from the mesh and not the animation. So be careful with that. And same thing goes for like the scale bones right there. But now that we have that, usually you don't really have to add translation bone names or scale bone names if you just turn animation rotation only off, because usually the animation data will translate pretty well over to the editor. Because from what I can see, this is pretty much a perfect recreation of what we had in Blender. So yes, let's see here. I believe that about covers it. And you'll also, if you have more than one animation in your FBX file, it will try to kind of, it will categorize them a little bit when you import them, so it'll give them like a little prefix. So if you have multiple animations in there that like say something like base node something 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 something, and then it says the name of the animation that you gave it, that's fine. There's also this remove prefix from selected sequences, which I can't really show off now because I only have one animation, but if you have like a bunch of these animations selected that all have the same prefix, you can click remove prefix, and then from all of those animations it will remove whatever you put in the box. So if I type in the prefix to remove is SM, it'll remove SM from every single animation that you have listed, like if they're in the same position, I believe. I believe that would cover it. So if there are no more questions, no more things that you all think I should show off, then I believe that should wrap up the showcase. Give a little second for the Twitch chat. Take a little swig of tea. Okay. What is the hardest animation you've ever worked on, and what makes it hard? And Ultraboo says that was fun. Okay, hardest animation I've ever worked on, definitely 100% has to be the default dance. I wouldn't even say that it was animated very well after, I mean, I've learned plenty of stuff after I've done that animation, so now that I look back on it, I'm like, oh, there's so many things I probably could have done better, and I might eventually go back and edit it a little bit, but definitely what makes it hard is the fact that all of her movements are constantly, they're really bombastic, really exaggerated, and since I was copying it off of like a Fortnite model, they have different proportions, so where a Fortnite model might be able to stretch with their arms and legs or body, Hat Kid's not able to. So some areas I was like, ooh, I can't exaggerate there, when I probably should have, but I just decided not to because I didn't want to make her model look broken or something like that. Another thing that definitely made it hard was the length. There were so many keyframes. The initial keying process of just putting in those major keyframes took probably around 10, 12, 13, 15 hours, something like that. I wouldn't call it a drudge. It was definitely long. But I enjoyed myself throughout the entire process. I'm really happy with how it turned out. I definitely think it could have turned out better than it did, because some of the movements I think just don't look exaggerated enough. But no, that was definitely the hardest one I've ever done so far. The Orange Justice might be harder for all I know when I start on that. I don't know when I'm going to start on it though. Any more questions? All right, sweet. As a final note, again, like I love animating. It's really, really fun to me, at least. So if anyone's watching that sees this and they want an animation done and they just don't want to do it themselves, I am perfectly fine with helping anyone out with doing animations for like their own sorts of projects, because I think it's really fun and I really like to get my animations out there, because I don't really get to do it a lot. Especially, I had a blast animating for Elsie's upcoming mod. I love Metal Gear Solid, so getting to do that was really fun. Um, and again, if you are actually trying to get into animation, I know this was a 2 hour stream, but again, there's really not that much to worry about. Just take it at your own speed, figuring out what you need to do. Take your time, learn everything by hand. Go back to some of the things that I've shown you. I tried to cover as much as I could. But again, it's not really that big of a deal if you don't get things perfectly the first time. Just really try to refine what you are working on as much as possible. Because I think the slower you do work on something, the better it will probably turn out in the end. Because if you do work a long time on a thing, and then you decide later that, like, okay, I could probably improve upon that, then you will improve upon that, and while you're honing that specific animation, you are honing your own skills. And again, a learning process, so just keep trying, keep doing your thing, and eventually you will get better. You'll get better really fast with animation. Because the floss animation was the first animation I've ever made, and that took, yeah, don't be a perfectionist, absolutely don't. It's since it's moving, since she's moving throughout the animation or whatever, it's going to be a lot harder to notice imperfections within the animation. Yeah, I think that's actually all I have to say on that. But yeah, the floss animation was my first one ever. That only took me 4 hours. Try to start off with something simple, maybe repeating as well. Maybe even try just going from pose to pose to pose. It's all how you want to learn yourself. Just get your hands in it. Yeah, yep, I absolutely do agree with that. For anyone who's watching the YouTube, in the chat right now, we have Dave Frost 1024 saying, like, yeah, try not to be a perfectionist. Your animation will be better as you like improve upon it, but you do get diminishing returns out of it. So if you do change like something, a little bit of an animation, and it does look better, then great. But you can't just keep refining that specific part, or else it's just going to be a waste of time eventually. But yeah, not everything has to reach the workshop. Some of it can just be for your own gratification. But yep, that about covers everything. If anyone has any further questions, ask me on the Discord. You can DM me, you can at me, whichever. Don't really care. Doesn't even have to be about animation. It could be about whatever. I'm always open. My DMs are always open to everything like that. And yeah, that concludes the stream. Thank you all for joining, and have a lovely day.